Awesome, thank you. All right. Easier to tell if we're doing everything terribly insecure? No.
That's it. Reading is fast.
All right, everybody. Get going here. You there, Kevin?
Yep.
All right. So this is CDNI. Hope that's where you mean to be. So passing around the blue sheets, and we have Jabber and note taking. So we're good to go. Kevin is going to be helping me out remotely today, and Francois could not make it. So this is the note well. This is Friday, so I assume you've seen this many times already. If not, I definitely suggest you read it. It governs how it governs your participation here at the IETF. This is our agenda. Going to do the usual agenda bashing, introduction, document status updates, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about URI signing. Is Frederick here?
He's not here, but I'll fill in for him.
You'll fill in for him? Okay. And then we're going to hear from Ori on some updates to the extensions, and then he's also remote. Yep. Yeah, he is there. Hey, Ori, can you hear us? Thank you.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, so and then we're going to do a couple things at the end. So does anybody have anything they'd like to change bashing the agenda? Nope, silence? Great. Hey, Kevin, do you want to do this part?
Sure. So this is the list of our published RFCs. It has not changed since our last meeting. If you want to go ahead, next page, please. Here is the rest of the RFCs. Next page, please. So here's the list of the remaining milestones. The only remaining milestone currently is URI signing, which Phil's going to give an update about in a minute. Next page, please. And then we have our beyond working group milestones, the rate pacing, HTTPS delegation, which Sanjay is going to talk about, and the SVA open caching extensions that Ori is going to discuss as well. You can page through.
All right. Let's see here.
And then next page.
This
Yep.
is the last, yep. So I'm going to jump over here and do this one now. All right. This thing on? How about now? Perfect. All right. So last time we met was in Singapore, and I said, hey, this thing's almost done. And then I went and got a new job. And I got totally sidetracked and had to get approvals from lawyers to come and talk about this. And I was fully expecting to come here this week and say that this was not happening for a while. But Tuesday, they came and said, hey, you can continue work on this. So Scurry did a bunch of work and came up with these slides to talk to you guys about today. So this might be more like 10 minutes instead of 5. So really feel like we're close. The final draft, maybe. Why is this not? Is that better? Okay. So have 3 open issues. One of them was a little bit contentious, and I want to talk about it today. And that's a new base claim. This was discovered by Chris Lemons. He's the one who implemented the URI signing with the token renewal for Comcast. And the issue was, and I'll let him come up to the mic and explain this a little bit more depth, but essentially, when generating an HTTP cookie to send back to the client, you have to give it a path. And when you have a regex for your URI, it's not really obvious what that path should be. And you don't want to reverse engineer a regex to come up with a path. And using path / is not really a good solution because then you pollute the namespace with cookies. So Chris has a PR. It's number 44 on the GitHub repo. And I want him to come up to the mic, if he would, and explain, that one back there, and explain what his proposal was, because several people reviewed it, and I think it was a little confusing.
All right, so I'll start with apologies. I'm new guy. I'm going to claim new guy status for at least a little bit longer. So I was probably violated a whole bunch of social norms when I opened this PR. But the basic problem is that when we send the cookie back for signed token renewal, we have to have the path, and you can optionally put the host in there. For our particular use case, we didn't need to have the host. And so I needed some way to pass the host and the path and the scheme. While the most sane way of passing a scheme, a host, and a path is via URI. Had a little bit of trouble with that because you don't always need all of them. You do always need a path, but it's likely that you don't need a host or a scheme for the CDN use case that we had. Again, other people may have different requirements. So I put in some language around that so that you could take the URI, but you could drop pieces. And maybe that's not necessarily the best way, but there should be some thinking around that. And so I added this base claim that gave all of that information that I needed for the cookie renewal. And then I realized that every time I use a base claim that says this particular cookie should be renewed at this particular path, every time I said that, I always meant, and the cookie is valid for that path too. And I thought about some complex ways of handling it, but basically, anytime you want the cookie for that, you want a cookie to be renewed at a path, it doesn't really make sense to have the cookie outside the path. And so either you can use the regular expression, but then you have to repeat all of that, or I introduced what I called the base container, which was basically a way to say in the CDNI-UC claim, go see the base claim. This applies to just use that as the container. That way it would keep the whole token nice and short.
So is the URI container then essentially empty, and it's just a pointer to the other one?
That's basically the idea, yes.
Do you need to have a pointer then? Like, can you just put the base claim into this container, or?
Right. So I thought about having like a base container, right? But the problem is that if you want to use signed URI token renewal, if you want to use token renewal with a URI with a regex that says, only use this for M3U files or only use this for WAV files, you need a regex for that. And so in order for the in order to have that power, that expressive power, you can't adopt the container for that purpose.
So how do you use both the regex and this container?
So you would put this container in, or so the base claim is not a container.
Right.
The regex is a container. So you put the base claim in. That tells you what path your cookie should be renewed at. If you have a regex for your UC claim, because you only get one UC claim.
Right.
So if you have a regex for your UC claim, then the regex controls what it's valid for. If you pass a regex that says this cookie is not valid this is only valid outside the path of the that you passed for the cookie renewal, then cookie renewal is not going to work very well for you. So it's up to you as the cookie maker at that point, or the token maker, to keep those in sync.
So where does the other container come in then? Because there was a second container in there.
There is. So the purpose of the base container, it's an optimization that says instead of repeating the text, it's strictly less powerful than the regex container. Instead of repeating the text as a regex, just go see that data. Otherwise, every time you use signed token chaining, you'd be required to repeat the path twice in the cookie or in the token.
Okay. I guess that's the part that I feel like there's a lot of added complexity there for that.
There's a second piece of that. We have discovered that there are fairly significant security implications with respect to the regexes. Importantly, we cannot allow anyone to sign cookies for us that we do not trust with our CDN.
Right.
Which is a kind of a problem. We would like to be able to say you can sign cookies or you can sign tokens, but only for your component, for your website. And so when we are serving things to your website, you can optionally authenticate it with those tokens. If we allow regexes, we can't really do that. This provides a fairly simple way to not bring back the globbing format that I hate so much, but allow a path prefix container effectively, so that we can potentially disable regex acceptance for certain keys that we don't trust quite so much.
Okay, let me ask one more question, and I'm going to give Leif a chance because he's been waiting patiently.
Yeah.
How is that different than the simple URI container?
So the simple URI container only applies to a single URI. It's useless for a chain.
But isn't it, so the description of it looked very similar to the description of what you had for the base claim.
It's similar, but so the simple URI only applies to a direct URI that actually matches. It doesn't serve as a prefix. And in any case, it doesn't allow you to elide the host.
Okay. Give Leif a chance. Talk.
Leif Hedstrom, Apple. One comment, two questions. I read this issue 44, and to be totally honest, maybe a little bit rude, reading this, I don't know if I'd be able to implement this specification. I don't understand it. As written right now, it's really cryptic. Second, does the base claim only apply to cookies, or does it apply to anything else?
I'll have to let Chris answer that.
So technically, at the moment, the base claim is primarily useful for cookies. We do allow signed token chaining is the only token renewal that we have defined in the spec, but it's a little open-ended. So there might be other ways of renewing that token. If those other ways needed a path at which that token should be valid, this would serve as information for that as well. So the primary focused need is to have that base path for the token and not have it repeated multiple times in the token.
Okay, that seems fair. I mean, just reading it, I thought it was for cookie only, and then the name is really confusing, right? But if it applies to more than just cookie, then I think the base name of this is makes sense.
Okay, Leif, before you go anywhere, I have another question for you. You were one of the principal people who was pushing for the cookie to be small and efficient, or the token to be small and efficient. The alternative here, I think, is to just have a cookie base or something like that claim that just has a path in it for basically handing the path off to the generation of the cookie. Is that something, like, do you feel like that's too much extra baggage in the token, and that we need to not do that? Because I think that's the primary driver for what Chris is trying to do.
Well, I'm not sure I fully understand the question or the specification as written, but it's optional, right? So we don't have to use this if we don't want to.
So you're correct. You don't have to use the chaining at all. But if you do use the chaining and you do need a path, basically you're like the path is likely in the regex, and then it would be repeated in a more specified form in another claim that says, hey, and this is the path that you set the cookie to, so that you only get it handed back to you when the user is accessing something in that scope. So it's like you have a segmented video asset, and it has a whole bunch of segments in a subdirectory, and you want to make sure that you set the path properly so that you always get that cookie sent back to you, but only when you want it. And that's what this path is. But it would likely be also duplicated in the regex for matching on it in the first place. And I think that's where Chris is coming from, to say, hey, we don't need that second copy of the path. But it's to me personally, it seems like a lot of work to get rid of those characters. But I know that people in the working group were concerned, people outside the working group were concerned about the size of the token, and also the efficiency of it. So
no, that's a good point. But I'm not sure if I see another solution. The regex could be .* right, for the path. I mean,
it could be, yes.
Right.
So not in all cases is it duplicated, but if you're making a very specific regex, it's likely duplicated. And trying to reverse engineer the regex and say, well, by processing this would be the path that matches, so we'll set the cookie to that, is way too much complexity, I think.
I think that would be computationally expensive. I don't think that's worth doing.
So
It may be actually impossible.
all right, well, unless anybody else has more comments. You have more comments? Okay. Unless anybody else has anything else to say, I think at a minimum, we need to work on the wording, because there's some concern that it's unimplementable as written due to the complexity of it. So we'll have to take this offline and try and come up with at least some better wording. Yeah.
If we do decide that we don't want to have the base container, then I'd like for us to think about having a simple path prefix option as a container, because the regex complexity attack is a fairly serious security concern that this is simultaneously solving for us.
Can you explain that a little bit more, because I didn't quite.
Okay, so basically evaluating a regex is potentially horrifyingly expensive. If you allow, current belief is if somebody can sign a cookie for you, or somebody can sign a token for you, then you trust that person with your CPU usage. If you want to be able to hand token signing keys to people who are not necessarily trustworthy with your whole process, but maybe only trustworthy with their website on it, then you need to be able to ensure that tokens can always be processed in a timely manner.
So I think the solution to that was that you would have the issuer in there, and the issuer would have their key tied to it. So I would give you your own separate key, your own issuer ID, and if you tried to sign it with the key other than that, it wouldn't work. So we would
Right, so
have
this
a
person,
scope.
so the person who has that issuer and that key does have authorization to sign tokens.
Mhm.
And I will I will check those tokens when someone is accessing a site or a resource that is in scope for the issuer at hand.
Right.
But I don't necessarily trust that issuer not to hand me malicious tokens.
I think there's an assumption there that if you're giving somebody a key and they're generating tokens for you, you implicitly trust them. And if you don't trust them, I'm not sure that any other form of a claim is going to help. I mean, if you have an issuer and you can say these are the sites that they're valid for, and if they hand me a token and I match the issuer and the keys, and then I notice they're giving it for another site, as an implementer, having a configuration like that, I would invalidate it there. I wouldn't trust them to do more. And I kind of feel like if you can't half trust somebody.
Sure you can. It's the model that allows, WordPress.org to host websites and yet not completely trust that. They're only trusted to provide content for their own component.
Right. And so you would have a domain name associated with an issuer and
Right.
configuration. And so if they gave you a token for another domain, you would say, no, sorry.
I wouldn't even ask the question, right? Because it comes back with I would keep a list of issuers and domains. And if I get a request for that domain and and it comes along with a token, I'm going to check to make sure the issuer is allowed to authorize for that domain. If not, I reject it.
I think we're in violent agreement.
Not certain we are, but it sounds like it needs to go to the list.
Okay. All right. I will move on to the next slide here then. This is another issue. This was brought up by Leif, saying that we want to remove the simple URI container. Recently we added a hash method that was to make smaller tokens. So if the URI was very long, you could hash the URI, and as long as the hashes match, awesomeness. So if we're going to keep things simple and it's something that nobody's ever going to use, we should probably remove it. It is kind of like the simple, obvious case. You know, if you're going to show somebody an example, hey, here's the literal URI you want to put in it. But what are some other reasons to keep it? It kind of feels like training wheels, like, oh, but they're always there. Why do we want to take them off? Well, just simplicity and not needing them. But I'm not sure. I don't have any reasons not to do this, but it seemed like kind of a basic thing to remove. And I was having a conversation this morning with Matt, and he had one comment on it. Ask him if he'd go to the mic and make it here.
Matthew Miller. So my comment with this was, it is possible when you're dealing with a hash, then you had to have a canonicalized representation of the thing you're hashing. And URIs don't have that. So you can run into some issues. Like there's the possibility of case mismatch. I mean, the biggest one's going to be case mismatch. So unless if the signer and the verifier don't have the same the same notion of what was hashed, there can be misses, and that hash might look invalid when it was just a difference in how the URI was hashed by the signer.
Right. So I feel like there's going to be, between a token producer and a token consumer, there's going to be some kind of integration step, and it's not going to be in a vacuum, but I think that's a good point. And I think having that extra step there, even if you want to say, hey, we're going to try it with the URI form first, make sure that's working, and then go to the hash form, would possibly make it easier for implementers.
Leif Apple. But Matt, wouldn't the same problem be with the URI too then? I mean, you're doing a stir compare or a stir case compare, and you same issue, right?
Well, if all you were doing is a stir compare, then yes, that would be a problem. But most, at least web browsers, don't do a stir compare when they're looking at URIs. That gets more complex for them themselves.
But still an implementation issue, right?
Same
reason as you have an implementation issue with a hash.
Right. I mean, I don't think I'm saying we shouldn't do this. I'm just saying if we're going to do this, then there needs to be an extra note that there are the potential for dragons here. And they're really tiny dragons, but they're still dragons.
Those are the
And
ones-
unfortunately, the spec requires the same thing. It says that for the simple URI container, it has to check that they are the same. It doesn't clearly define what same is. And I suspect strongly that it's non-obvious because things like case insensitivity in the host part. What do you do with differently cased capital letters in a direct IPv6 address, right? There are dragons there.
Yeah, so to me, this is like an integration step.
Yeah, well, maybe it should say URI compare the same and then point to the document, because this is sort of a part of URI registration template. But there are also possibly multiple levels of URI compare the same, you know. I think for HTTP is a bit more obvious. Like scheme part is case insensitive, host part is case insensitive.
Okay, and there's a spec for that already, and it's in the URI spec.
I will check, let's say, the URI spec or URI registration, which is a separate RFC. So, but if you remind me, I'll dig out text.
All right, appreciate it. Yeah, that would be good just to clarify, even for the hash method, because that one I believe is kind of also vague. So that helps clarify both the hash and the URI method. But does that mean that we keep the URI method or we get rid of it?
Matthew Miller again. This is not saying you can't get rid of it. It's just you'll need to make note of this. This might require some implementation experience.
Okay. All right, moving on. The crit claim. So this is something that I cribbed out of JWE and JWS. Matt's already shaking his head. Man. Yeah. So the point of this, I got a lot of people saying, hey, but I want to add this, that, or the other thing into this token. You know, I want to add can we put some kind of like opaque handle in there or something? And I was like, oh, that sounds like tracking. Let's not do that. But people were coming up with some valid reasons to do this too. And they, want to add extensions, but things that are not necessarily worthy of being in the draft. So this is pulled out of the JWS spec, and the JWE spec references it directly. And it's essentially a header that allows you to say, hey, this is the extension, and you're required to understand this or invalidate or reject the token. And it's different than version, so it's not really about upgrading. It's about extending the current version. So if somebody wants to add something, they could say, okay, I'm adding this field, and I'm putting it in the crit, the CDNI crit claim to say that you have to know what this is, and if you don't, reject it. So I thought it was fairly innocuous. I got some eye rolls from people, though.
Matthew Miller again. So I think so reiterating some off list comments, I didn't see necessarily a problem of just calling this crit. You can use it similar to how crit is used for JWS. It has the same meaning here as it has there. Like, this claim is not valid unless you understand these other things and can validate them. I think the only question mark is if you've already minted a 1.0, if you already minted a version that didn't have this kind of provision, you're going to need to increment the version. I don't think that's true yet, but it's something to consider.
Yeah, that's why I was hoping to get this in before we close the door on this, which I want to do very soon. So, all right. So those are the only 3 open issues. Sounds like 2 of them are mostly okay. One of them needs a little bit more work. I want to put them all on the list and give people time to look at them and provide feedback, especially about number 44. But I really, really, really want to be done with this. And I think a lot of people in this room really want that too. I would love to see those 3 issues get closed, and we have a new version of the draft within 2 weeks. I don't know if that's maybe crazy based on the conversations we had with the number 44, but that's what I'd like to see. Are there anything that people think other areas of review? We had JWT experts look at this already. Maybe since we added more claims, I kind of had a JWT expert look at it last night, and he mostly said it was okay. And what else does anybody else here feel that we need before working group last call? I saw somebody move for the mic, but then they thought better about it. Okay.
Phil, I'm going to move to the mic.
All right.
Can you see me?
Yeah. You have full control. I don't need to press the button for you.
Oh, sweet. So I think it sounds like a good plan. I think if you can get out the next version, then I'm the shepherd. I'll go ahead and do a quick shepherd review and make sure everything's kosher. I haven't looked at these latest PRs, so I will go over those. And then once that looks good, I think we can probably go to working group last call.
Awesome. That's what I wanted to hear. All right. Well, come up, you said you were going to do for Frederick. Give me 1 sec here to get those slides up. Take that. And here's the clicker. Yes.
Okay, I'm filling in for Fred, who could not make it here. Let's see. Okay, so here's the agenda. I'll go through the motivation and then walk through the updates since the last draft and some examples from the draft that we have here. So really wanted to lay something out as far what is the motivation for this draft. And if we look at it, the first question really is that, in the current RFCs that we have, DCDNs currently are not aware of supported delegation methods by UCDN. So that was one question. And adding delegation metadata, if we do want to add that, what does it give us? Basically it gives the downstream CDN to become aware of any delegation methods that UCDN prefers. And so basically having a place in metadata would be one area where the CDNs can at least communicate about this. So if we do that, then obviously you have a need for developing a common framework to handle the HTTPS delegation. So that's kind of what we were thinking about, that if we need to do a common framework, then logical step would be to how do we change the CDNI metadata to be able to do that. And what this, the third bullet really is intended to talk about, what is the scope and what is not in the scope of what we're doing here. So what is not in the scope is this draft does not change any aspect of the certificates or how they're handled or any security issues, because it's simply enabling the CDNs to communicate about what delegation method they support. So we're really looking to provide means for communications. And so incidentally, as we look into extending the metadata, the examples that we have right now that we can follow, that if one of these methods were available, then how would we, what changes would be needed in order to support one or more of these delegation methods. STAR is one which currently is in the working group last call in the ACME. And then sub-certificates is another option, which is a working group document in the TLS working group. And LURC, there are drafts out there, but this is it does not belong to any working group yet, so we'll have to see how that goes. So the changes from the last draft, there were some updates to both star and delegated credentials, so some minor tweaks there. And then from the previous version, we did not have lurk, but given that there's a lurk drafts 1.2 and 1.3, which extends the TLS options to use lurk. So we've added text in this draft corresponding to the changes that have been come through the lurk draft. Just at a very high level, if the UCDN wants to delegate content to the downstream CDN, in this example, the addition that we have done for the lurk is essentially support the metadata object. So we would specify the lurk delegation method, and additional information would be provided, such as the key server. And we have to do a little bit more running of this concept to see if there's anything additional needed. And I know Amil is looking into that to see if there's any other additional information needed. I don't know, Amil, if there's anything you want to add up on the mic with this, or you're still looking at it.
Okay, thanks. I go through logged documents. There are three protocol specifications: a core protocol on a version for TLS2, another for TLS3. And actually, lurk include a registry request that enables the client to request what the server support. So we don't need to have that in the metadata of CDNI because it's already inline in lurk. We just need to add something about the protocol between the client and the server on the version of the protocol to support TLS2, TLS3, what it's.
Okay, so that's something we need to go back and look at those drafts and then come back and make some changes here in this version, next revision, that is. Okay, so this slide 6 and 7, I'm going to skip over because this is how we had originally proposed adding a secure delegation and then the specific methods. But on the mailing list, Kevin had some suggestions. So if we ignore 6 and 7, then basically not having the mi.secure delegation, if we don't have that path and then the specific methods, an alternate way to do this is basically listing out each of the individual methods. For example, the Acme star delegation, the lurk delegation method, and of course the subcerts would be very similar to what we have here, but we didn't list it down in this example. There was an error. So I think this was, Kevin, based on suggestion that you had in the mailing list. So that's kind of what we're thinking about as well, that this might be a more trimmed way of handling it than needing the approach that we had here with the secure delegation object and then listing down the individual methods.
Okay, so you agreed that we can probably get rid of the secure delegation. It was a little redundant, I thought.
Yeah, I think we agree with that, yeah.
Okay, cool, thanks.
Yeah. Okay, so, and you have the details in the draft, and we still are going through it. So, and I know we're going to have additional revisions based on all the 3 drafts that we are examining right now, working with. So there'll probably be more changes forthcoming. But just wanted to open up for questions here and see if, from the working group standpoint, if this is something we think is important, given that there are delegation methods out there, and then we don't have a way today to make the downstream CDN aware if any of the delegation methods are supported by the upstream CDN.
I have a question if no one's at the mic.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah.
So I guess I asked this a few IETFs ago, but I'll ask it again now. What is the plan for maintaining all of the different methods in a single document? I think it becomes more difficult as you add more new methods because then you will never be able to finish this document if it always has, new stuff that have normative references to something else? Are we thinking about yet which one of these we think are the best method or methods that we want to support? And if so, do we want to start breaking them out into their own documents? Does that make any sense?
Emil, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, actually, we don't have any favorite solution. What we want to do is to have a registry of the existing solution and the minimum metadata to enable an upstream CDN to inform downstream about the method that he supports. And so with a public registry, we can add new one in the past without redoing all the process. Yeah.
I think that's fair. We have a registry already for payload type, right? And if you're going with metadata, then you can always add more metadata. I think my question was more towards if Acme Star is close, but Lurk is not at all close, are you going to look to try and push forward with an RFC just with the metadata for Acme? Or are we going to wait for this to solidify more?
Yeah, this is an open point. Actually, we have subset on STAR, which are working group document, in TLS on Acme. On Lurk is still pending for an IETF landing room. So we don't know how, we have two at least, so it's enough to justify the registry. But the Lurk is part of for us, is part of the I will say the legacy solution.
Right.
Is one of the three that are envisioned for the future.
I'm all for that. My only concern is how we progress the documents, and if we have to wait for Lurk, that's fine. I just want to know if that's your plan to continue working on this until waiting for Lurk to get a working group or an RFC, versus if Acme is close and people want to use it, do we want to move forward with that?
Well, there is two questions here. So what we are going with the draft if Lurk does not go forward, on what solution people are going to choose after. I mean, they can choose I don't know if the player is modified, they can use subset or star. If Lurk will be available, they will be able to use Lurk after. We are not trying to impose one way to do it. This must be clear. Otherwise, we don't need to have a registry.
Well, if you're just doing metadata, there's a registry for metadata already. We use payload type, right?
Yep.
So you can register new metadata, and if people support it, then they support it. If they don't, they don't. And then they will be able to advertise the new metadata objects being defined in these docs.
Yeah, this is exactly the scope of the document.
Okay. So you want to just keep on with the single document and see where it goes.
Well, my personal view is to have an update of the metadata interface document with object on update of the registry to be able to expose 2 or 3 methods.
I don't think we need to change metadata. I think we just need to have a draft that has the metadata objects and registers the new payload types.
Yeah, I think we were speaking about the same thing. That perhaps there is some way. What do you?
My only concern.
This draft, do we want to keep it or just to use it to update the registry?
I think the draft itself is fine. My concern is that you're going to be trying to make normative references to things that don't exist yet, right? And you could speed up this process by splitting this into separate drafts.
Okay,
if you wanted.
I think we can speak
something
about
to think about.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. the two of the three we know are moving forward, at least, the status in the working group. Lurk is still out there, so the two that we know are, within the working group.
But it's not a big deal to split it in two and to keep the lurk separated to ease the work of the working group here.
I'm sorry, was that a question for me?
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, actually, I was thinking about it. So does it make sense to that we split the draft in two, keeping a star on subcert in the mainstream and having lurk an update for lurk, waiting for lurk to be adopted somewhere in the IETF?
I think it gets you to a working group adopted draft and a RFC faster, but it doesn't matter to me.
Mm-mm.
We
Yeah,
can discuss it offline. You guys can think about it and how you want to proceed.
Well, I say, from my point of view, it's important to have quickly HTTPS delegation for CDNI.
Right.
That's so. That's it. Then we can discuss of the rest by mail.
And I think that having lurk in the document makes it harder to progress this document forward because lurk is in the air.
Yeah.
So just to ask a clarifying question, Kevin, you want to see one document with two methods that are not lurk that sets up a registry, and then a second document at a later time that is lurk.
Yeah. I think, oops.
We can do that. We can keep all three. We can split it into 3 documents. We can split it into 2 documents. It doesn't actually matter to me. I just think that my concern is that if lurk takes a while, it will hold up the document.
Fair enough. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's all I have.
Okay.
I have still one question. When will we speak about working group adoption of the draft?
So I think what it comes down to right now is if it's one document with lurk,
Yep.
we're not going to do anything about working group adoption until that's ironed out. But if you want to separate that out into a separate document or a couple separate documents, that's something that we can discuss on the list, what it should look like. But if you want to separate that out to something that we can take action on now, we could do that much sooner.
So the question is to the room is, are people here interested to have HTTPS delegation method to be exposed very quickly in the CDNI documents?
Yeah, and I believe that's what Kevin is suggesting, and also Phil. So we can, think about if we want to have a progression here, then we don't need lurk to hold up. Something to think about.
So let's say that we agree to split the document and to put lurk in another one. That's it.
So as an individual, I think it's something worthwhile to have. I don't know that I'm particularly concerned about the timeline of it, but I think that that's a good thing to have, HTTPS delegation. So I would be in support of that.
As an individual, I agree with Phil. I don't know about the timelines, and I haven't personally looked yet at what stages subcerts and ACME are in. So the question of 1 versus 2 versus 3 documents, I don't feel like I can make a comment on that currently, but I think it's probably a useful thing to have.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, those 2 documents are progressing. Rich is here, and he can confirm that it's already on the last, working group last call. And subcerts is also making progress, but I have not checked the email in the last day or 2 to see where it is now. But it's also progressing, so I think I expect we're pretty much safe to move forward with these 2 methods, at least in our CDNI scope, because they are progressing forward.
Okay, sounds like we've got some work to do then.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, and next up is going to be Ori doing a remote presentation. So Not sure how this is going to work, if I'm going to have to move the slides for him or not. Do you have some way to control slides there?
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Well, I will be your hands then.
Okay. So good morning, everybody. We're going to go over two drafts. One is the request routing extension, and one is trigger extensions. Both are coming from requirements that we brought in from the String Video Alliance. Can you next slide, please? So just as a brief refresh, the focus in the String Video Alliance Open Caching Working Group is video content delivery. It's a kind of a CDNI use case where the commercial CDN is the upstream CDN and the ISP is the downstream CDN. What we brought here is new extensions to request routing and for triggers that's coming from requirements that are coming from the open caching specifications that we've been writing and implementing in the String Video Alliance. So we're going to go through two drafts. One relates to request routing. We added footprint objects and metadata objects for that, and the next is for triggers. Next slide, please. So for the request routing extensions, we're going to go over redirect target address and UCDN fallback address. All of the requirements that we're bringing here implementation to are we've been through in the last meeting in Singapore, and we've done a cycle over the requirements and got some feedbacks, and this is the result. For the triggers and extensions, we're going to talk about versioning because we're going to change the trigger interface. We're going to talk about content selection, how we actually choose the content that we want to implement, apply the trigger to. We are adding generic extensions for the triggers, and we are adding specific generic extensions, which are the location policy and time policy.
Your audio is starting to cut out a little bit, Ori. Sorry.
Okay. And we're going to add footprint and capability objects for those extensions because they are all optional. Next, please. And I was requested to disable my video, so let's see if it improves the audio. So we start with request routing. Next slide, please. So the first one is the redirect target capability object. The requirement was to be able to advertise the redirect target to the UCDN. The downstream CDN is telling the upstream CDN where to send traffic to. The redirect target can vary by footprint. So for different regions, different places, we might have different redirect targets. Redirect target can change over time for different reasons. And it should be possible for the downstream CDN request router to resolve the upstream CDN redirecting address directly from the target address. The reason this is important, and this is one of the feedbacks that we got, is that in the case of DNS redirect, we don't have a path and we don't have anything else other than the address in order to tell who's redirecting to that address. So the redirect target capability object has the following properties. It has the redirecting hosts. It's a list of upstream CDN host names, which are the ones that are allowed to redirect to that address. There's the DNS targets and there's the HTTP targets. Next slide. The redirect target objects are the DNS targets. The DNS target properties is just the host name. Basically, this is the host name that you use for the CNAME to delegate the traffic to the downstream CDN. We have the HTTP target properties. It has a host, which is a host name or IP address with the optional port. Basically, it's an endpoint. And we have a pass prefix that allows the CDN to request for a specific pass prefix to be added before the original path, and a directive to include the redirecting host as the first path segment before the path. So these requirements were already discussed in IETF 100 in Singapore. One feedback that we got from Kevin as a discussion point here is if we want to be more flexible and have some kind of an ABNF form that we can use instead of pass prefix and include redirecting host, which will make it much more flexible. Hi, Ori. I think my comment was more towards just if you wanted to clarify in the text itself how host path prefix and include redirect host worked in the construction. Okay, You so could add some ABNF there, but not necessarily towards changing the object itself. okay, so that was just a comment for the actual text in the document, and rather than in the draft, rather Correct. than how the object looks like. Okay. Correct. Okay. So maybe that's a question for everybody else. Is does anyone see the need to have a more flexible configuration than what we're proposing here? Okay. So next slide. So this is the other way around. We want to advertise the fallback address in case of doomsday, and we have to redirect back from DCDN to UCDN. This is a rather simple use case. We want a metadata object that just says, hey, this is the host that you're going to redirect to in case you have no other option in your pocket. So it's a simple metadata object called fallback target that has a host and an address. Next slide. Okay, so triggers interface. This is the more complicated stuff. So let's just dive in. So first, about what we're going to talk about is versioning. We need to define a versioning scheme for triggers, which is currently it's not there in the current RFC, because we are going to define version 2 of the trigger commands and objects, and we need a way to advertise version support via FCI. We are introducing a way to select content for triggers by regex and by video playlist. And we are going to add generic extension objects, which is a list of generic extension objects that allows you to do all kind of specific manipulation over the trigger. Currently, we propose first two initial ones, which is the location policy and time policy, and we're adding the support for FCI advertisement for the extensions. Next slide, please. So let's start with versioning. We're introducing trigger v2, which has three new fields, three new properties. It's the content regexes, the content playlist, and the list of extensions. In order to be able to use this trigger v2, we're introducing version 2 of the interface. We have CI trigger command v2. That uses trigger v2 instead of trigger. We have CI trigger status v2 that uses trigger v2 instead of trigger. And the CI trigger collection has no change. So, and we're adding an FCI to advertise which version are supported. We'll talk about that later. What's important here is to understand the versioning scheme. What we're suggesting is those three interfaces, the CI trigger command v2, the CI trigger status v2, and the CI trigger collection together are defined as version 2 of the interface, of the trigger interface. And when somebody says, hey, I'm supporting version 2, it means they support those 3. So the discussion point here is this versioning scheme acceptable? Does anybody think that we need to do something different? Okay. Next, please. So content selection. So the first new way to select content is by regex. Basically, we add a property called content regexes, which is a list of regex match objects. The regex match object has a regular expression, case sensitive, a boolean that says if it's case sensitive or not, and a boolean that says if you're going to do matching on the query string or not. So the object looks like the one here. We have an example for regex and the case sensitive and the match query string booleans. Taking the feedback that just from Chris Lemon's point about regex complexity attack, we probably need to think about that here also. We know that the parties that passes this regex between them is the UCDN and DCDN, which are supposed to have trust relationship between them, but this can also be delegated along the path to other DCDNs, and we need to think about the implication. I admit I haven't thought about that yet, so I'm taking it as a feedback to think about it for our use cases more. Next, please. So the next way to select content that we brought as a requirement from the SVA is to use playlists. The main reason we want to do that is for prepositioning. It is very easy for video applications, video CDN and video caches to talk in the language of playlists. So we added content playlist object, and that playlist has the following properties. It has playlist and then the type of ABR protocol. As you can see on the right side, an example. The ABR protocol comes for a new registry. This registry will currently have the HLS, MSS, and Dash protocols, and we can add more in the future if there's any reason to do so. One feedback that I got, and I think it's interesting to discuss, is do we want to use just the names HLS, MSS, Dash, or add a version into them, which means that in the future when there's an HLS V8, we're going to add another one to the registry. This comment, I think, came from you, Kevin. I think, well, with all of these things, the first version you can really name whatever you want, and it only matters when it gets revved. So it's probably okay, but I wouldn't mind seeing a version there. And as I think about it now, I think ABR protocol is probably not is not as generic a name as we could go with. It could just be something else protocol or protocol. Theoretically, we could have playlists or manifests of other types. They don't have to be video. I agree. So maybe playlist protocol, because protocol, I think it's too generic and it's already being used in other places. So I don't want to overload that. So
Right.
Maybe,
Playlist protocol is good.
okay. So
Phil Schreiber, as an individual, how about media protocol?
Media protocol.
okay. So I'm fine with media protocol. So let's write that over the mailing list, and we'll just make sure that everybody else fine with it. So and Kevin, I think as you suggested, I will add versions from the first version already. I think it makes it more clear. Next. generic extension. So I follow the line of the generic metadata. It's pretty much the same, but after I even thought about using them instead of defining new ones. But after talking with Kevin about that, we agreed that it makes more sense to have separate object definitions. But they look very much like the generic metadata. So we have trigger extension type, we have a trigger extension value, the mandatory to enforce, safe to redistribute, and incomprehensible. And one feedback that I got from Kevin, and I brought it as a discussion point, is do we actually need the safe to redistribute? So do we think of use cases in which this CDN1 passes the trigger command to the next one also? And do we think of use cases in which if this CDN1 cannot comprehend the trigger or not a trigger, a specific extension object, is it safe for him for that CDN1 to pass it on to the CDN2? I think it is because I have an example, but it doesn't mean that that's the way it should be. So it's kind of an open question here for the forum. So Ori, I think your example was valid. I think that one made sense. I think the only thing that concerned me was that the immediate DCDN is still going to return that it failed, right? Even if it passes it downstream. And it's not clear to me that the ultimate UCDN can tell where it failed and where it didn't. So maybe we need a new type of status that is not failed, but it's kind of a warning status. It means finished, completed, but with warnings. Yeah, I think we need something. I haven't really thought this through yet. It's not a problem that we had with metadata. So I think we need to think a little bit more about what the ultimate upstream CDN gets as status if some CDNs in the middle failed to apply the trigger. Okay. We should also, in that case, discuss how we propagate those statuses from a mid CDN to the up back to the UCDN, because it's not necessarily the first one that is for. Yeah, I don't think it's well defined in the existing trigger doc. Right. But it's a yeah. Okay. I guess I assumed that the existing trigger by itself was mandatory to enforce, but now we have kind of parts of it are not mandatory to enforce. We should think about that and see if we can come up with a reasonable explanation for why we don't need it or how we could do it if we do need it. Okay, so I'll open it up again for a question in the mailing list, and if you want to do it, I'll also focus on how we do warning propagation. Next slide, please. So the initial set of extension objectives are the location policy and time policy. An example for location policy is that we want to do preposition everywhere but New York City, or purge from all caches only in San Francisco, for example. And for time policy, we control the time slot in which a table is executed. For example, and this is an important example, we want to preposition a new episode at an off-peak time the day before the release. And that leads to the discussion point of how you actually designate what it means an off-peak when you have multiple time zones. So the current proposal that came in Singapore was that we can use time policy in conjunction with location policy, and this way we can designate different times for different locations. But that means that we need separate triggers for each and every time zone, because there is no inclusion of extensions one inside the other. At least we haven't done so. I haven't done that yet. So assuming we are not going to do inclusion of extensions within extensions, which means that if we want to do 4 a.m. in the morning for each time zone, we need to run different triggers for each and every time zone. The other alternative, which we also raised in Singapore and we decided not to follow, was to use local time, kind of add local time flag into the time policy. And I think it's a good idea to rediscuss it now, just make sure that we are fine with not adding it, or we want to open it up again.
Phil Sorber speaking as an individual. So it seems like time policy and location policy are really, like, you have to go into so much detail to cover everything, and then local time doesn't give you a lot of options. It's just saying, 4 a.m. local time. It might be nice to do a default policy of 4 a.m. local time, and then, for a given location, here's an alternate time policy to do overrides.
I'm not sure I understood exactly how you see it, but can you give an example, or you want us to do it over email?
I don't really see it in any particular way. I can maybe come up with an example for you, but I'm just thinking that time policy and location policy is overly specific, and local time is very generic, and it would be nice to be able to use both and have one and say, hey, this is the default is local time, or maybe just to be implicit, the default is local time.
Yeah, I think if you take the time policy and you add a Boolean attribute that says this is local time and it can default to true or false. And if it is local time, then, at 4 a.m. your time, do this. Otherwise, excuse me. Otherwise, it's UTC. I think we can support both, but it makes sense because of the use case for local time to support local time, in my opinion. Okay, so I'm fine with it. I'm going to add the option to use local time if it makes sense, and up to the implementation to decide what makes more sense to use location or local time depending on the use case. Next. So this one is the location policy. It uses a list of locations, which are basically a location or object that were defined in the metadata. Nothing new here. So it's extension object which has a list of locations. Each location has an allow or deny to decide if what we're saying is inclusion or exclusion for that location and the specific purpose.
Hey, Ori, sorry to interrupt you. Before, when you moved your mic up and held it closer to your mouth, you were much clearer.
Yeah,
and
sorry.
Now you're starting to get.
Okay,
yeah,
sorry.
it's much better. Thank you.
I forgot to do that. Okay. So, should I repeat or it's fine?
If you could just do a quick summary over it again, would be helpful. Thank you.
Okay, so the location policy object has one property. It's called locations. It's a list of locations. For each location, we have an action, which is allow or deny, which basically means include or exclude. And maybe this was like kind of copy paste from the metadata. Maybe it makes. No, actually, we'll leave it like that. I'm using the location rule object for metadata, and I think there is no good reason to define the new object. So it's good enough for the purpose. So allow means these locations are allowed to execute the trigger. Deny means this location you should avoid executing the trigger. And we have the footprints, which are the footprint of object as they were defined in the metadata. Next, please. Time policy. as you can see here, time policy is not a list. It's just a single object, a single time window. The reason is that, as far as I could think of, I couldn't find a good reason to execute a trigger in list of windows. If anybody thinks there is a good reason to do that, for example, if you want to do something, but you want to do it always between every day between 6 a.m. or to 7 a.m. in the morning, then maybe you bring a list of windows. I didn't think that for our use case it makes sense, but if anybody else thinks so, then let's discuss it. Okay. So for now, we will leave it as a single window, not a list. I thought about it a lot because we can just put a list and just say, hey, just use one if that's what you want. And if you really have a good use case, you can add a few of them. Kevin, do you have any observation about that? I was trying to think, is there a reason you would want to periodically do something, periodically pull, periodically invalidate? I can't think of a good reason to do that through a trigger, a single trigger. Right. Yeah. I guess I would do that in the upstream CDN. Just
right.
Issue a trigger every day, not just delegate it and forget.
Right.
Okay. So we'll keep it as it is. Next. So that's the FCI objects. The first is the trigger version. So we've added an FCI object. The capability value is a list of versions which are supported. The assumption is if it's empty, if the list of version is empty, it means you fall back to the original trigger version as was defined in the original FC. The versions are just strings. You can put anything in them. The next is the playlist protocols. Again, I'll change that to media protocols instead of ABR. And here I give a list of the support protocols. And if we go for versions, which means that now it's going to be HLS version 7, but in the future version 8, you're going to have to state each and every version that you actually support. And the last one is the generic extensions. It's just the same as we do with metadata. We're going to give a list of the names of the generic extensions which are supported. Next. That's about it. Any questions? Anything? Okay, so thanks. Next steps, I'm going to put the feedback from here and send it on the mailing list, and then add it to the drafts and update.
Okay. All right, so back over into our agenda here. We kind of went over a little bit, but we have plenty of time at the end of the session, so it's no big deal. The chairs had some questions. Actually, it's not doing this right. Try that. All right, so Kevin, you want to talk?
No, you can go ahead. Or do you
Okay.
want me to go?
So we have a plan for URI signing. We have a path forward for HTTPS delegation. Specifically, we're not sure. We need to figure out where we're going to go with the number of drafts and the content, but we have a path forward. And then extension. So I believe it is the conversations had about the triggers draft was that we would need to recharter if we were going to adopt that. Do you want to do a hum about rechartering?
We should do a hum first on whether folks
On the-
feel
on
like
the
triggers
RR?
is good.
Okay, so the other draft here is the RR extensions, and we want to do a hum on this to see if there's interest in the working group to adopt this. So if you would like to adopt the RR SVA extension draft, hum now. If you do not want to, hum now. All right. So there was hums for. So we'll take that to the mailing list with that comment. So then the triggers. What do you want to do with the triggers, Kevin?
Can we do a hum to see if people think this is a good idea in general?
Sure. Want to do a hum to see if the general idea of the triggers SVA extensions draft, if people think it's a good idea and worth working on. If yes, hum now. All right, there was a decent amount of humming there. Do you want to do the negative side of that or no?
Yeah.
Okay. If you think it's a terrible idea, hum now. All right, silence. So
Okay. So then the chairs have a little bit of work to do, and I think the draft has some work that it needs as well. I don't think we have to address adoption for that one. I don't think we're ready, but the chairs will go ahead and start looking at what it will take to recharter to get a new version of triggers.
all right. I believe that's everything. Do you have anything else, Kevin?
I do not. Does anyone else in the room have anything they want to say?
No? All right. Well, thanks for coming here on Friday. Appreciate it. And perhaps see everybody in Bangkok.
Everybody have a safe trip home.
And thanks, Ori, for joining us remotely. I know it's probably pretty late there. Appreciate it.
Not so late. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Phil. I'll talk to you later. Thank you,
All
Phil.
right, bye.
Bye.
Anybody need a resolution?